Hey all, this is War 8 against 4 Loki, which was really a very fun one for me and I think for a lot of us. There are quite a few people in 4 Loki that used to be in SSx, a fair number in SSx that used to be in 4 Loki, and even more who used to be in the same alliance before being in either of them. There are just a lot of old friendships linking these two alliances, and even though this was going to be an intense one, we went into this, I think, approaching it more as fun than we do some other close ones. However, we do have something of a history of folding against them, and I'm not sure how much of it is, the name of the alliance itself, how much, their history weighs on us. And so I want to talk about that for a minute. If you try to rise in the ranks in competitive war, you are eventually going to run up against somebody that you have heard of. Possibly somebody that you have tremendous respect for, or somebody who's been something of a boogeyman to you over the years. It doesn't really matter. The key in my particular experience is to remember that regardless of your expectations for how the war may go or how you think the war needs to go, what you actually do is not going to change. If you remember that, things get easier. And what I mean by that is if I'm planning an offense or helping to plan an offense against an opposing alliance, it doesn't matter who placed a Professor X on Power Snack. All that matters is that there's a Professor X on Power Snack. And so we send our best answer. And then when I go into my fights for the next part, it doesn't matter that I'm facing Vega's defenders. All that matters is that there's a Spider Ham in front of me. Now, I may be more certain than normal that if I'm facing Vega's defenders, they are going to have maxed Mystic Dispersion and maxed Limber because I know how he approaches that. But I would go into a fight against somebody I'd never heard of, assuming the same thing because that's the safe way to operate. And if my individual actions are not going to change against an opponent, regardless of who it is, then it doesn't really matter who it is, does it? And so if you find yourself getting nervous against particular opponents, just try and keep that in mind. With that, though, let's get into this because I am taking on the champions of a lot of people I know, and this one is fun. But be sure you stick around to the end because, in addition to my war fights, Stranz did send me 2 more Spider-Man 2099 fights that again do not take advantage of the True Strike node on the boss, and they are absolute beauties. You do not want to miss those. So first up here we have Lyzer's Eye Hulk on the Aggression Fury Strikeback node. Lyzer was actually one of my very first officers when I joined SSx back in the day. Fun fact. Really respect the hell out of her as a player and a person. But this is definitely good placement here because normally when you're playing Eye Hulk, he's unblockable, or when you're playing against Eye Hulk, he's unblockable for a good portion of the fight. And even if you were able to land some hits into him while he's unblockable to try and keep those aggression furies down, then he'll heal and he's effectively unstoppable and invulnerable, so you can't hit into him at all. So there's a very good chance at the end of this fight that you will at best take some damage. Now you saw there I did get clipped earlier going for a heavy counter. That was stupid. I should not have done that. But that's also why I threw on an invulnerable in case I did anything stupid. So I did throw a special. Strikeback did come into full effect because I had lost the read pre-fights, but that's completely okay because I'm only throwing my specials when Eye Hulk is at as a low power as possible. I can block hits like that for no damage at all because of those indestructible charges, but I'm also trying to bait out his specials and or heavies as much as possible because I always want to have a few of those indestructibles in my back pocket. So we've been keeping his Furies under control really well, We just hit 15, so we're not going to be able to turn off his healing. We are going to need to deal with that. So we hit in, and there it goes. We back off. We do not throw any specials. The last thing we want to deal with is an unblockable special 2, even though I'm normally pretty decent on the evade for it. We wait out the regen. Thankfully, it's short. But see how he was up to 5 Furies there? Actually blocking that could really hurt. But because I'd been holding on to those indestructible charges, I had 4 perfect blocks, essentially, banked. And so, closed out that fight really easily. Next up, we have this Spider Ham that Vega placed. Obviously an old friend. We've played together in, I think, 4 different alliances over the years. Wow. This is also a good placement because one of the key things to do when fighting Spider Ham is to try and throw your specials as much as possible because you don't want his spider nonsense to build up. But Power Alternator adds another wrinkle to that because he may unexpectedly, if you don't pay attention, be gaining power as well, and things could potentially get out of hand. Killmonger does kind of get around that, because you just always have specials because of those taunts, and the spider nonsense doesn't really matter because you have True Strike up all the time anyway, and you're not really relying on your specials for damage. The basics are plenty. So on to Professor X. This one gets a little messy. I think it's actually possible that I overdueled for this one, because I kind of worked out a couple things that I could do in emergencies, and then tried to do them when it wasn't an emergency, which is just not smart. I'm not sure if this placement was intended to counter Mr. Fantastic, because if any alliance knows that I tend to use him here, it's these guys. It shouldn't have been a counter, because pretty much every mistake that happens here is unforced and is my fault, not Reed's. I should have hit into that, because then the falter would have expired already, and that right there just would have landed. I would not have taken that 20% health in retaliation. My debuffs would be pretty much paused right now, and when I land that, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't have lost all my debuffs, and uh-oh, I am back to less than square one, less than square zero, because I don't even have the pre-fights that I entered the fight with. He is now getting the full benefit of Power Snack. I should have backed off there, because every time I go in, I'm refreshing that dexterity and allowing him to trigger Power Snack again, but I should have gone in there because I didn't have a dexterity buff to cycle, basically, so there was no penalty for hitting him, and it would have helped create space. Thankfully, I can block that special too. Also, thankfully, because he's thrown 2 in a row, we are now up to 50% attack reduction on his special 2. I don't know why I bothered to throw that heavy there. I probably just should have thrown the special 2, because then I threw it there instead of landing a medium and then throwing the special 2. I think I was probably a little scared at this point because I had lost the debuffs, because nothing I've done for the last minute makes any sense watching this back. That, I just messed up the evade, but again, when he threw that, that was the 3rd special 2 in a row, and so we were up to a 75% damage reduction. That special 2 was originally intended to do 4 times the damage it did. And it took us from 81, or it took us from about 80 to 54. That could have killed me. That probably would have one-shot anyone other than Reed, and it would have taken Reed close to death if he hadn't already thrown 2 special 2s. So it was very dangerous. Luckily, we've just stacked our debuffs again. It's safe to throw the special into him even with the falter timer clicking down, because it won't trigger on a special attack, but then we do have to safely trigger it after that before going for the heavy. Now the debuffs are paused. We have 2 stacks up. I think I probably started breathing again right around here. So I think I'm waiting for... No, I was waiting for that. That's the fancy thing that kind of makes a little more sense here, but I still didn't need to do it. Either way, he was taking so much damage from the reversed willpower that he just fell over at that point. So So yeah, there were probably things to learn from that video, but I think an awful lot of them fall into the category of what not to do. But that is also a lesson in the fact that you do have 5 minutes, and many, many fights out there really are salvageable. So hold on, keep breathing, try and turn it around. Ugh, God, that was terrifying. Anyway, now we have this Mordo that I took last war. This was the one where last war I got hit 16 times. I don't think all of them were my fault, but that was not ideal. Anyway, one of the mistakes that I made last time was only hitting into his block with a medium once, which meant that my next medium automatically triggered his astral evade. So I'm being sure not to do that. Every time I hit into his block or into him before I had True Strike up, I had it in my muscle memory to do medium light, regardless of whether I felt I needed to or not. See, even there with True Strike up, I did it once out of habit. You want those habits when you don't need them, as opposed to not having them when you do need them. The other thing I did was making sure that I had the timing down for countering a special one. Again, kind of like I mentioned on the last video, I don't think I'm really doing anything different here. It's just that the True Strike is showing up, and last time it wasn't. But I'm not going to complain. I did build up to my special 2 there, just on the off chance that he turtles. I'm also running an indestructible boost, so I can eat 3 special 3s, and then if I have indestructible charges up, I can potentially eat 3 or 4 more. As long as I don't get degened, I shouldn't lose much health here at all. I can get the True Strike off his special 2 as well as his special 1, so I'm not really concerned about, pushing him to that or anything like that. I know that Taters is obviously running a high level of Mystic Dispersion. I expect nothing less. But again, it doesn't really matter because I'm holding on to those indestructible charges. I just wait for him to throw this special. I don't charge in and panic or throw the heavy into his block because I know, like I said, even if he goes red, we can tank several special 3s. This is a fight that just rewards patience. If I don't mess up, Killmonger has total control. So now on to 2B here. This is a lane that I have not taken yet this season, so I've not taken it with these new updated set of nodes. It's been strike counter for a long time, but now it's strike counter block penetration instead of fury. And it also has that hard knock life node, which means that pretty much the only way that I would be able to land a heavy, which would be really important to fully countering hard knock life, would be for me to parry. And if I parry, I'll get a passive disorient on me, which will not give me power, because normally, the active disorient would help Killmonger, but it will not give me power, and it would make it harder for me to parry in the future, and I would take more damage. So I intentionally threw that, knowing that I could eat those hits, and I just wanted to reset the counter and push him over a bar so I could get True Strike. That was kind of a calculated risk. But at this point, I'm going, okay, I'm not going to have heavies. I've made a couple errors in which attacks I've thrown up until this point, and so I am probably going to start to stack block penetration charges on him. So I just need to be really careful and play this as well as I can because I'm going to start taking block damage. See here, even though I was trying to stay on top of it, I was actually not able to get up to a bar before I got to my special 1. And then I really do feel that that was the smart move to hold on to my special 1 because I wanted to make sure that I had refreshed True Strike and not that I lost it in the middle of the special if I just mistimed it. So if you didn't see, that last medium that I blocked did a few thousand damage. Definitely hurt, but if you boost adequately, Killmonger is still a hard enough MODOK counter that the node itself, despite interfering with most of the things you want to do with Killmonger, doesn't make it an unsafe fight. Kind of the same story on this one. Guardian is such a good Apocalypse counter that even if I mess this up, I know I have a lot of room. Now, on that note, you'll see me play this incorrectly because what I should have done is just eat the disorient and play this stun immune. Instead, while I was playing around the strike counter, I was trying to avoid the disorient because I didn't want the block damage to add up. But I think I kind of needed to pick one. I needed to either play around the strike counter or the disorient and just eat the other. And since I think the strike counter is the more dangerous one, what I should have done, like I said, is just play this stun immune, rely on the perfect block there to take no damage or almost no damage in case he can fail the perfect block from any of his specials. And that just would have been better. Now, I was using power back, which I really did not need to because, wow, look at that damage. Then one hit in fixes it. But I think next time, even if I boosted less, even if I didn't use power back, I would follow a similar plan of just playing around strike counter and completely ignoring the disorient. And I think that would have looked cleaner. But that's also kind of a statement about just how strong Guardian is. What was that? I lost like 1,000 health, maybe 2,000 health over the course of that fight, despite me coming out of it and saying that I should have played it better. This is why I put Guardian in the essential tier for my recent war video on tech champions. I'll link that in the description for anyone who hasn't seen it. He's just such a tank. But now I take on Overseer with Killmonger. I have done a very similar fight to this recently. The last war, I actually forgot to record Killmonger against Overseer on the Safeguard node. And I think he's probably a little more difficult there because that fight looked a lot like this one does, except I was doing less damage and he was unblockable for about a third of it, which is generally a little bit more annoying. But our plan of attack here is simply do not parry him. I put on the regen boost both because I have a ton in overflow and because I'm expecting to take some block damage, baiting out heavies. And then we want to make sure that we counter in after his special to keep that true strike up, because as long as we have that true strike up, it doesn't matter that he has his little auto block passive. We're going to hit him a bunch. I don't plan to throw many specials. I think I end up throwing one in here, and so I do get that concussion on me. But the first one barely does anything and is basically just willpower healing for me. And after this one, I'm going to save to the special 3, because if he's not dead by then all of those bleeds are going to finish him off through pretty much anything. So I'm fully expecting him to go into his cosmic mode eventually. It probably won't be quick because I'm not gaining a lot of power, which is probably another reason not to put him here, because most of the best counters to him are just not going to be gaining a ton of power. But I'm expecting him to go into that, so I'm expecting him to hit quite hard, to have his regens, and I just don't expect to care about any of it, because Killmonger is tanky as hell, has plenty of damage, and is turning off the scariest part of his kit on a node like this, and I can just build up to his closer and have that in my back pocket in case timing gets difficult. I think one thing I could have done in this fight is actually made a point to block more hits, because I am not keeping reverb up all the time, especially as he's starting to gain power here. But that's okay. He's down to 20%, and we're not even at the halfway mark. I wouldn't be worried even if we were on the old 3-minute timers, and with 5 minutes, this is totally fine. Now, a fight like this does mean that we are more likely to lose the tiebreaker, but I really am very strongly of the opinion that playing into the tiebreaker is just likely to get you killed more often trying to do the fast thing, and I think that taking the safe fights, the safe matchups, is more likely to get your death count lower such that you don't tie. And everything I've seen about this season has made me more firmly convinced of that, but I realize that that is still up for debate, and unfortunately, we actually did end up losing this war on a tie. So I won't say any more because, we have our own things to discuss after a loss. But like I said, it was incredibly close. When I checked in, it was like 2-2, then it was 2-3, then it was 3-3, then it was 4-3, then it was 4-4. We held on at 6-4 for a little bit with a lead, and then we just died twice towards the end. And at that point, we kind of knew it was over. This is just too good an alliance to not clutch the end like that. And that's what happened. But I really enjoyed it overall. As Aries, one of my old friends on the other side, said, since we can't all be in the same alliance all the time, because, it caps out at 30, a war like this is really fun because it still kind of feels like we're all playing together. And I think that's the healthiest way to approach matchups like this. And I really enjoyed him saying that because that just kind of put into words exactly what I was feeling. So now it's time to get into the bonus fights because Stranz sent me a couple more Spider-Man 2099 matchups. And the first one is the same America Chavez that I died to last war with Torch, actually. If you haven't seen that, it's in my last war video. I'll go ahead and link that in the description. I do think that that fight is extremely soloable with Torch, but he runs into a few particular challenges. One of them is that you just have to deal with Mystic Dispersion. And you will notice many, many times throughout this fight that Spider-Man 2099 does not. The other thing is that Torch has to worry about how he finds his openings after the heavy because he really, really wants to open the Utopian Parallel and not the Negative Zone because the Negative Zone will make her Special 2 unblockable. And when you have to deal with Mystic Dispersion and the power gain on her Special 1, you kind of have to deal with the fact that she will probably eventually have a Special 2. And you guys saw how narrow the margin for error is on that particular issue last fight. But Spider-Man 2099, because he can just bait out her Special 1 forever, doesn't really have to worry about which dimension she activates as long as she doesn't activate that reverb one. And so he can just wait out the heavy safely and come in afterwards. Additionally, once he gets the Wither up, she actually loses power when she throws her Special 1. So between losing power on the Special 1 and not having any buffs expire to fuel Mystic Dispersion, he just has complete control over the fight. Plus, when he inflicts that Wither, he removes one of her dimensions. So even though she just activated another, between them expiring and him removing one with the Wither, she just doesn't have many up, and so it's extremely difficult for her to ever get 3 of the same and therefore randomly activate the reverb, which is the other risk with Torch, which did happen to me last fight. And so every single thing that can go wrong with Torch, Spider-Man 2099 just turns off. And I'm not saying that this makes Spider-Man 2099 a better war champion than Torch overall, because there are other things that Torch is better at, but this is why having different kinds of utility is so important, and why Torch's damage alone is not necessarily enough sometimes. Just, this guy is so good, and if you do not have one ranked up yet in your battle group, you need to get one. And if these videos aren't convincing you of that, I don't know how to help you. But moving on to the second one. So this is Mojo on Kinetic Transference. I've taken this several times recently with Reed, and it's gone extremely well every time. It doesn't feel like even a little bit of a risk to me. And so there are certainly alternatives to 2099 here, but watch how well this goes. And Stranz does a great job of annotating this. He's already put in some captions on this one. So Kinetic Transference can obviously be a problem for Mojo because he eventually builds up, and then he probably throws his Special 2 into block, or does that with his Special 1. That's just so much power gain. And it just eventually gets out of hand, right? But 2099 with his heavy has already blunted Kinetic Transference once. Now he's thrown up Wither, and so we're up to minus 140% ability power gain rate. So Kinetic Transference is actually draining for 2/5 of what he normally gains from a blocked hit. Then he has a second Wither up. So any blocked hits in this window would have been draining for, I believe it's 150% of what he would normally gain. So he doesn't keep the double Wither up, but he doesn't need to because he has both an Exhaustion and a Wither. And yeah, Mojo is just going down quick. So he is hitting a lot harder than he is on the boss node because, this Mojo does not have True Strike, so Spider-Man 2099 can't get around him that way. But you see how it doesn't really matter. He's just controlling all of the most dangerous aspects of Mojo. Once he gets set up a little bit, he's controlling all the most dangerous aspects of the node. And even though he is not necessarily able to go for his maximum damage rotation, he's able to do plenty of damage to close out the fight in a reasonable amount of time, and it's super safe. I don't know what more you can ask for, honestly. So thanks again to Stranz for sending me these. I will just talk about the battle group for a minute here. We did end up with a 164 this time around, so I'm really, really happy with them. They absolutely delivered. Only one death on a very difficult map. As I may have mentioned, we had a pretty worthy foe. But overall, just great job to the whole BG. Great job to the Alliance. This, like I said, we lost on a tie, but this is the closest we have ever been against for Loki, and it did not feel like an implosion. It felt like a really good fight. So thanks to Campo for taking the lead on planning while I was away having fun. Thanks to Slay, who had to play against his personal hero in terms of Lyser's Omega Red playing in his first season in Tier 1 and delivered on several mini-bosses, and just thanks to the whole battle group in general. As I've said plenty of times, and people are probably tired of me talking about it, it's a really great group, and it's been a pleasure. Continues to be a pleasure. Anyway, I will catch y'all next time. Take care.